everyone. My name is Jisoo Kim. I'm director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies and also co-director of East Asia National Resource Center. I'm also affiliated faculty of History, International Affairs, and East Asian Languages and Literatures. I would like to welcome you all to our third Korea Policy Forum of this semester. This event is co-sponsored by GWIX and East Asia National Resource Center. Now, before I forget, I need to mention that this event is live streamed, and those of you joining us through WebEx live streaming, please mute your electronic devices so that people don't get distracted by the noise you're making. Thank you. So today we have a distinguished guest speaker, Ambassador Joseph Yoon. And as you can tell from the number of audience we have in this room, it is clear that today's event received a lot of attention despite the fact that today's Columbus Day. Now, unfortunately, this is not a holiday for GW, so faculty members have to teach, whereas students also have to take classes. But we have our own academic calendar, and we don't follow federal governments. So I hope you understand why we're having an event on a federal holiday. And it was also because we were trying to fit into Ambassador Yoon's busy schedule. Today's topic, prospects for a nuclear deal with North Korea, is very timely after the working level negotiation in Stockholm between the US and North Korea, and I'm sure you're all here today to listen to what Ambassador Yoon says about it. Now, before I introduce Ambassador Yoon, I would like to personally thank him for keeping his promise. So he came to give a talk at the end of the year reception that was co-sponsored by GWIX and Korea Foundation in December 2017. And back then I asked him to come back to GW to give a talk specially for our students because that event was aimed for students. And so I am so grateful to him that he kept his promise and came back to GW to meet with our students. I see, there were many students who RSVP'd, but I don't know how many students are here today. But those of you who are students, please make sure that you raise your hand and ask questions. Don't lose this opportunity. We'll make sure that we'll call on you during Q&A. So now, I would like to have the great honor to introduce Ambassador Joseph Yoon. Ambassador Yoon, recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on relations with North Korea, as well as broader U.S. East Asia policy, most recently served as Special Representative for North Korea policy. Currently, he is Senior Advisor with the Asia Group, a DC-based strategic consulting firm, and the U.S. Institute of Peace, an independent and nonpartisan federal institute working on peace and reconciliation issues throughout the globe. He is also a globe affairs commentator for the CNN. Ambassador Yoon's 33-year diplomatic career has been marked by his commitment to face-to-face engagement as the best avenue for resolving conflict and advancing cross-border cooperation. As Special Representative on North Korea from 2016 to 2018, Ambassador Yoon led the U.S. efforts to align regional powers behind a united policy to denuclearize North Korea. He was instrumental in reopening the New York Channel, a direct communication line with officials from Pyongyang. As Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for East Asian and Pacific Affairs from 2011 to 13, Ambassador Yoon led efforts to normalize diplomatic relations with Myanmar. He also served as ambassador to Malaysia from 2013 to 16, and before joining the Foreign Service, he was a senior economist for data resources in Lexington, Massachusetts, and he holds an MPhil degree from the London School of Economics and a BS from the University of Wales. So we will ask Ambassador Joseph Yoon to give a talk, and then our Associate Director Yeonho Kim will be moderating. We'll be asking a few questions, and then open the floor for a Q&A and moderate the session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Ambassador Joseph Yoon on the podium.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim, for your great generous introduction. It's kind of scary coming here because it's so near where I used to work. I think it's only about 2 blocks away, but it's always good to be in GW, and I thank you for hosting me today. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I see a lot of familiar faces. John Merrill, Ambassador Jong, thank you for coming, as well as many others familiar faces here. And my old boss from Indonesia, she's here too, Miss Harvey. and thank you very much. Um, as Professor Kim mentioned, my last assignment for the State Department was to be as a special representative for North Korea policy. The first time I went to Korea was in 1996. That was my first assignment. I was a political officer there. So on and off, I've worked on Korean issues, I guess, about 23, 24 years. And in that time, I've seen a lot of ups and downs. But one thing remains the same in those almost 3 decades. That is, when we negotiate with North Korea, it's fundamentally about two things, which is how much denuclearization for how much normalization. So I want everyone to bear in that mind, how much denuclearization for how much normalization. Is the clip, let me see, working? Actually, I don't really need this, it's a prop. But so, I mean, why the situation has evolved over time, it is always about how much denuclearization for how much normalization. And, as you know, in all the negotiations, it tremendously depends. It tremendously depends on the will, I would say, will of the leaders. And here, obviously, we're particularly talking about will of the American leader, Donald Trump in this case, and the will of the North Korean leader, who is Kim Jong Un. And really, tremendous things have happened. In fact, I came to this position as special representative on the Obama era. It was really middle of 2016 when I was kind of having a very good time in Kuala Lumpur that I got a call from Washington saying, would I like to be the next special representative for North Korean policy? Of course, at that time, middle of 2016, I thought Hillary Clinton would win the election, and I worked very closely with Secretary Clinton, who was my boss when I was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary. And I said, it would be kind of fun to go back and start working on a tough issue like North Korea. And so I readily accepted. But elections have funny ways of surprising you, of course, And when I got in, about a couple of months later, of course, Donald Trump won the election. And for a while, actually, initially, during the transition, I really thought I would be out of a job. But for whatever reason, they kept me. Maybe they forgot I was there. So it's interesting trying to engage North Koreans under Obama administration. To me, that was very, very tough. In fact, one of the calls I made immediately after Trump was elected was to ask them, listen, we're going to have a new administration in Washington in a matter of weeks. Let's prepare for that new administration. And this is when I talked through the New York channel, through their mission in New York. And their response was very, very negative, very, very adamant that they would never talk to Obama administration. And so I asked them, why will you not talk to Obama administration? And their answer was actually quite clear. They said around early 2016, Obama had given a YouTube interview. And in the YouTube interview, he had said that among many things, it was a long interview, the subject of North Korea came up, and Obama said he thought really ultimately the answer was regime change. And the North Koreans responded, if you believe regime change is the answer, we will not talk to you. We cannot talk to you. And so the matter ended there. And in fact, throughout the couple of months, I did try. And then the new administration, of course, comes in January 20th, 2017. And very quickly thereafter, North Koreans were very keen to talk to me. And in fact, we had a agreement, and I had invited them to come to New York in late February. This was 2017, and in fact, the day they were leaving, it turns out that there was an incident in Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, where I don't know whether you remember, the brother was killed. Kim Jong Un was killed. And there were a couple of ladies, I think you may have seen footage of it. One, an Indonesian lady, one, a Vietnamese lady, who went over to Kim Jong Un and rubbed this stuff on him. Well, the stuff turned out to be a VX nerve agent, and it is, in UN, it is classified as WMD, and immediately, my project of having North Koreans over, I think at that time the delegation had been headed by Chesani, was stopped. So that was really first missed opportunity. And of course, in middle of all this, there was tremendous amount of rhetoric going on. Between, we were in the middle of fire and fury. Trump was angry, Kim Jong Un was angry, and in fact, a lot of business done by tweet at the time, And I remember getting up one night, one morning, and someone from State Department calling me and saying that the president had just said about Kim Jong Un, and let me read it to you. The rocket man is on a suicide mission, North Korea best not make any more threats to the US, or they'll be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen. And of course, Kim Jong Un is not going to stand still. He responded, the entire US is within our range of nuclear weapons, and the nuclear button is always on my desk. And so it gets worse. And I think this one from President Trump gets the gold medal, my nuclear button is bigger and more powerful than yours, And all this continues, and certainly I was middle of 2017 genuinely concerned that we could see military hostilities. And it's not as though Kim Jong Un or Donald Trump would get up one morning and decides to press the button. No, I think if you have this kind of tensions rising, military alert readiness going up, you're going to, the likelihood of mishap, military accident gets greater. And I don't know whether you remember the incident over Hawaii where they thought there were incoming missiles. And all the Hawaiians were alerted and they were taking cover. Now, we quickly found out through secondary monitoring that this was a false alarm. Now, supposing it had happened the other way around, that is, North Koreans realized there was something coming. Now, they don't have backup systems, and they don't have quick response systems. So what would have happened, certainly, if they'd found out? And you're really beginning to risk a lot when tensions are high. Well, things began to change, and I would say the real credit for this change goes to President Moon. And I think through Winter Olympics, but much earlier on, of course, his so-called Berlin Declaration, he made reconciliation and improving North Korea a big part, in fact, a major part of his agenda, and he was determined to see that tensions would be reduced, And so, and then so you begin to get next here.
Sure.
And you begin to get significant reduction in tensions until you had the first meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un in Singapore in February, I believe. No, June 2018. And then you see the rhetoric change immediately. And after the meeting, you have President Trump coming in and saying that they had fantastic chemistry. He's very smart, great personality, worthy negotiator. And then going on from there into a period of what I would say, a very rosy period. They exchanged letters, and I think, on one interview, he even said that he was in love, So really, I think that changed things substantially around the middle of 2017. So let's just take a seat now and see what that kind of meetings have accomplished. And it is true, number one, tensions are down. I don't think anyone can deny that tensions are down. So I was in Denver last week, and in Denver was often mentioned as a potential target for any kind of a North Korean attack. This is because it's not huge like LA or San Francisco, but big enough, and near enough. And suddenly the folks in Denver are very relieved that tensions are down. Also, there is no testing, no nuclear testing, no ICBM testing. Well, it is a problem. There are short-range missile testing, and about 2 weeks ago, you saw SLBM testing. But still, the big provocations are essentially suspended. And in return, the US gave up joint military exercises. These are joint exercises conducted by the United States and South Korea. And also, I would say sanctions enforcement have been eroded. There is no question that both China and Russia have been more relaxed about sanctions enforcement. Now, the big problem in this picture is, I would say, twofold. One is that short-range missile testing continues. Second problem is that North Korean production of fissile material have not gone down. In fact, as we speak, every year that passes by without a proper freeze, the North Koreans increase their nuclear arsenal by about 4 to 6 nuclear devices. So that is a big problem. Now, let's look at the political equities. I think, in my view, this is a sustainable situation for President Trump. To be honest, he hasn't had many foreign policy successes. And so for him, North Korea stands out for him as a success in the sense that tensions are down, nuclear testing is suspended, as well as ICBM's testing. And for a guy who really believes in making deals, he wants to build himself as a deal maker, he's putting forward North Korea's success cases. And his other deals have fallen through. He pulled out of TPP, of course. He pulled out of Paris Climate Accord. He pulled out of Iran nuclear deal. And the Taliban deal got busted a few weeks ago. So I think the bottom line, and this is my belief, I would welcome your comments, that as long as North Korea continues to avoid, suspend nuclear testing and long-range missile testing, he will continue to declare it as a victory. And within the administration, his position is clearly sustainable. A couple of weeks ago, National Security Advisor John Bolton who was probably his biggest detractor, got fired, And so there is one less voice that was truly fighting against engaging North Korea. I think there are still voices among his staff who I would characterize it as kind of non-believers, call it whatever you want, but against engagement. But those voices are probably not seriously in the way. Outside the administration, of course, U.S. Congress is a major factor, and especially Republican opposition. It's been typically Republicans who have opposed engagement in the past. During six-party talks, they were very, very difficult. And of course, during agreed framework, they were very difficult in making things like HFO, money for HFO available. But now, really with Trump in government, in the White House, I really don't see any opposition from the Republicans. And the kind of Democrats and anti-war activists who would have opposed some dealings with North Korea are really quite silent. I think they will complain that Trump remains unpredictable, but still, their bottom line is U.S. must engage, and they have no really other solution but to seek a negotiated solution. I think also working in Trump's favor is the American public opinion. For example, a Gallup poll that was conducted in 2017 found over 50% of Americans who responded thought that North Korea remained the biggest security threat for the United States. Much more recent poll found it was only 14%. So there is a big decline in those who see Americans who see North Korea as a genuine security threat. But that's not really to say I don't think that Americans view North Korea more favorably. I don't think that has changed at all. But rather, Americans view North Korea as less of a security threat. So all things considered, for Donald Trump, it is sustainable. Then how about Kim Jong Un? I think if you were to assess a winner in this latest round, it has to be Kim Jong Un. He has met Trump 3 times, Xi Jinping 5 times. He met with Putin once, and Abe is practically begging him for a meeting, begging Kim Jong Un for a meeting, but Kim Jong Un continues to stiff Abe. And in short time, in 18 months or so, Kim Jong Un has emerged more legitimate, more respected. 2 years ago, American public would see Kim Jong Un and thought he was a kind of an overweight young man with a funny haircut, But now I think most people see a leader who belongs in that stage. So it's been an incredible transformation, I would say, for Kim Jong Un above all. But in terms of substance, if his kind of diplomatic, card has increased in value. In terms of substance, Kim Jong Un has not gained that much. North Korea remains the most isolated place in Asia, and I would argue that North Korea is still the poorest country in Asia. I don't think there are any Asian countries where hunger and malnutrition is as widespread as in Asia. They're diplomatically isolated, politically isolated, and also economically doing very, very badly. So even though you can say in this round Kim Jong Un has come up on top, his imperative to continue negotiating has not changed. So despite all the symmetry, I still think it is imperative that they continue to negotiate. So again, let's come back to where we started. What does negotiation actually mean? And what do we mean by denuclearization and normalization? And if you remember the offer in Pyongyang, it essentially consisted of denuclearization, in which they offered that they will get rid of everything in Yongbyon. I assume it meant their plutonium program, as well as their HU program, their reprocessing program, and everything that is in Yongbyon. It had nothing to say about verification. It had nothing to say beyond Yongbyon. Now, I mean, we have people who are very much used to doing stuff in this, but opinion differ. If you ask real nuclear experts, what is Yongbyon worth? And they will say it's worth quite a bit. It has about 200 to 300 different kind of complexes within it, and it is their declared program. The problem with just getting Yongbyon is that it's politically not feasible. Politically, why? And that is because we were promised Yongbyon in the agreed framework. We were promised Yongbyon in six-party talks. Now, we can debate, until tomorrow, until the cows come home, why these agreements failed. But the fact is, politically, many people in Washington believe we had gotten Yongbyon before, and just getting Yongbyon again is simply not enough. Now, what is it that on the normalization that was on that North Korea wanted most desperately in Hanoi? And it broke down because for Yongbyon, they wanted all of economic sanctions that were imposed by UN Security Council since 2016. So that's where I believe it broke down, and I believe that's where the problem lies. Now, we had seen the repeat, I believe, of Hanoi, a week ago in Stockholm. And I think a week ago in Stockholm, I mean, it's very interesting to watch actually two competing narratives, the American public narrative and North Korean public narrative. And the North Korean statement came out immediately afterwards, even quicker, and they blamed it on US not changing its position at all, and I thought it was very hard-hitting. And then the American press statement came out saying that, hey, I thought we're good talks, and it reminds me of when a couple has a fight, when a couple has a fight, one party says, you're really bad, I'm never gonna see you again, and the other one says, oh, I think things are going well, I think you can generally assume things are not going well, and so I thought US statement was very much understated. I thought it was very typical State Department statement where things don't go well, but you want to put a best light on it. I remember, I think it was 2005, I went to a very testy summit meeting between Noon and George W. Bush. This was in APEC in 2006, and I was a note taker there. And it was a horrible meeting with Noon blaming everything going bad with North Korea on Trump, and George W. Bush. George W. Bush getting very angry, and that was the whole conversation. And at the end we had a statement saying that the meeting was very productive. Two sides agreed we work together on many issues. So this American press statement at the end of the Stockholm meeting reminded of that. I think in the Stockholm meeting, the North Koreans made two mistakes in the lead up to it. Number one is they really thought firing of John Bolton would change U.S. position. Now, I mean, this is very typical North Korean. I think they want to take all the credit for getting John Bolton fired. But John Bolton was fired for many reasons. Probably the most important, Trump didn't like him, you know? And second, it was also about Iran, it was also about Taliban, and it was also about Afghanistan, and maybe a little bit about North Korea, but certainly John Bolton getting away from the scene does not mean U.S. Position will have changed radically. I think the second mistake they made was launching SLBM. You know, U.S. delegation is going there because U.S. side had asked publicly many times for the meeting. And to go there is bad enough to go there, you know, after they've done a show of force in terms of SLBM launch. But to go there, then come back with some weak offer, it was not going to do them any good. So I think that was the second mistake they made. But I also believe still the expectations on US side and North Korea side are so far apart that it's impossible to bridge that gap in a meeting, in one meeting. I mean, you know, I think the US press release said, well, we talked for a long time. We talked for 8 hours. 8 hours is not very long. Look, I mean, you know, you sit down, there are about 10 on each side. If you do the introductions, that's already 1 hour. It's time for coffee break, you know? You do your opening position, and then it's time for lunch break. And you do a response, well, you know, it's finished. That's 8 hours there already. So it is not long time to meet, and certainly if they have to discuss these issues, they have to really spend days and days on it, you know. So what can we expect? What can we expect in coming next few months? I mean, your guess is as good as mine, but I'm going to give you my guess, which is that given the political forces driving both Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump, I do think some kind of a deal, call it what you want, an interim deal, is possible over the next, 6 months, 12 months or so. And if you're a negotiator, you start from where you left off, which again, I call it Yongbyon, Yongbyon, I guess it should be more Hanoi. But for denuclearization, it's gotta include something more than Yongbyon, and some of that is already there. They have already offered Punggye-ri, which is their nuclear testing site, that the international inspectors can go and inspect. They have already also offered Dongchang-ri, which is their missile site, which again, they can go and inspect. And so I think those are what I call, what golfers call games, So Yongbyon plus Punggye-ri and Dongchang-ri are certainly possible. Now, beyond that, the US side would be looking for what I call freeze, a freeze in testing, a freeze in production of nuclear material, and so that's the problem with the freeze is, of course, how do you verify a freeze? And you cannot verify it without an inspection. You cannot verify it without what I call declaration, which is declaration of what North Korea has. If you don't know what they have, how are you going to verify it? Which is why I think a kind of a roadmap is an easy give at this point, which is you build a roadmap on when are you going to freeze, when are you going to do a declaration, when are you going to allow inspection, so that freeze is verifiable. And then even you can add beyond freeze elements in the roadmap. One thing that certainly US side should want is a definition of denuclearization. What does it consist of? Because when you see the joint statement between US side and North Korean side, that was after Singapore in 2018, we talk about it, the statement talks about denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. What on earth does that mean? There are no nuclear weapons in South Korea or nuclear weapons program. So does it mean US assets that come there now and then? Does it mean Guam, or does it mean denuclearization of United States? What does it mean for what we call extended deterrence? That is our commitment to defend South Korea against nuclear attack. Another phrase for it is nuclear umbrella. Do they want nuclear umbrella removed? So these, I really do think a definition is quite needed, and that would be very, very helpful. And so I would say, roadmap is quite essential for any kind of deal, even if it's interim deal. On the normalization side, I think again, in Hanoi, there was no sanctions relief offered for Yongbyon. I think if you had some kind of denuclearization package like that, certainly I would say, something like some sanctions relief would be warranted. And a package like that should also include humanitarian assistance, especially food, medicine, and so on. And I think the two sides could agree on some form of end of war declaration. I mean, it has many issues that arise if you do an end of war declaration. But as a political document, you can agree on that. And I think as we agreed in mid-1990s, there's no reason why we shouldn't open diplomatic liaison office respectively, US side in Pyongyang, and then and North Korean side in Washington. And finally, not like roadmap for denuclearization, there should be a roadmap for peace process. So ultimately, I think this is what I would hope that working level meetings would concentrate on, and do a deal based on something like this, which could then be submitted to leaders for their approval. So I think something like that should be doable over the next 6 months, 12 months, and then you might get third summit. Well, that's my hope, but there are many other things that can go wrong in the meanwhile. And so with that, I very much look forward to your comments. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now we do a discussion, no?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Yoon.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Yeon-ho Kim, Associate Director here at GW Institute for Korean Studies. When we started to organize an event with Ambassador Yoon, he suggested actually late October at first. But for some reason, he changed his mind and suggested October 14th as an alternative. And I think obviously he knew, when the working level negotiation, would take place. Did you also know it's going to be Stockholm? Probably yes.
Well, no. I don't know that much what's going on. But what North Koreans typically want to do is have a meeting where they have a mission, and typically it would tend to be in Asia, Vietnam, Singapore, or Malaysia. But after they got elder brother in Malaysia, Malaysia's been kind of
Maybe not the best place.
relegated. Yeah, but in Europe, say with Geneva, Berlin, Stockholm, typically. Yeah.
So now that I know he has a big crystal ball in his hand, my big question for him today is going to be, when exactly the third Trump-Kim summit will take place, but I'll leave it for our dinner.
Okay.
Private dinner. But before I open it up to the floor, let me ask some questions, Mr. Jun, as a warm-up for the Q&A. So my first question as a moderator is this. So when you look at the balance sheet of the things to be exchanged between the US and North Korea, you just listed the things where they can exchange as an interim deal. Whether certain measures are reversible or not, it seems to be really a big matter. So for example, the US would argue that under the current US-China relations, it's politically almost impossible to restore UN sanctions on North Korea, UN Security Council, once it's removed. So my question is, how significant do you think this matter, this issue was at the working level negotiation?
Well, I think at working level, you do want to give your bosses the opportunity to say it is reversible, because you want that freedom. But that is very hard, and also reversing something is also very, very damaging. So I would say that, for example, you mentioned UN Security Council, whether it's reversible because of China and Russia. I mean, certainly, if North Korea were to do a nuclear test, China would be very upset. So they would want to come down hard on North Korea. So I think it is not a bad thing for something to be very difficult to reverse until there is consensus in the international community. I do believe that doing nuclear negotiations bilaterally is not necessarily always helpful. I think it would be helpful if you broaden the negotiations, especially to include South Korea and China, who have so much, skin in the game. So I just don't think it should be reversible. It should be easily reversible.
And one of the reasons the six-party talks was agreed upon was that when you have this multilateral talks, there's no room for North Korea to deny whatever they promised to.
Yeah, I think the good thing about six-party talks is that you can genuinely have consensus, as we often did. But at the same time, you're going to have, of course, countries like Russia and China who would be more sympathetic as well. So that's not a bad balance.
When you look at the calendar, it seems that we have just a few months to break the stalemate with Pyongyang before the end of this year, considering North Korea's stated deadline and the political schedule we're going to have in the United States. So how probable do you think that without breakthrough, we will go back to the so-called fire and fury tension with North Korea next year?
I mean, as I said, I do think there are very important political drivers in both Pyongyang and Washington. In Washington, the most, a recent significant driver is Ukrainian impeachment. What impact is it going to have on North Korea issues? While it's clear there is no direct impact, I mean, would it make President Trump want more, to get the focus out of here and into North Korea? So either that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending where you are. And I think this is something that Kim Jong Un himself realizes. So how is he going to play this? Now, I mean, you look at relationship and the discussions meetings between Kim Jong Un and Trump. And to me, there is no real relationship, despite what Trump says. I mean, to imagine the two are friends, I think is way, beyond imagination. But rather, they're playing each other. They want to take advantage of the situation. So I'm very certain that Kim Jong Un sees something in impeachment efforts that's building up, among the Democrats here as an opportunity for him. And if this impeachment momentum gets significantly underway, will Trump want to, focus on something else? So I think that's a very real tie-in between political forces and Trump and Kim Jong Un.
And I think President Trump, he has been consistent in terms of indicating that he's not really interested in going war with any country, even though he has some really big problems with those countries.
No, I agree with you. He does not want to see military action by any means. Yet, supposing his election were up to it, he feels that his election, has to be done. The dynamic has to change. I mean, what would he value more, getting reelected or having a war as a distraction? I don't know.
Speaking of President Trump, I have one more question. I have at least a couple of more questions, but another question about President Trump. Do you think President Trump has a clear idea of his own red line on the nuclear or missile tests by North Korea? So, what further provocations will be ignorable for the Trump administration before it declares enough is enough? Right?
I think to me, the two clear red lines are nuclear testing and ICBM testing. And those he has repeated. I think if they were to do an ICBM test, for example, he would see it as Kim Jong Un going back on his word and him losing face. It would have serious consequences. Now, there are things in between. Like one thing that we always had a problem is satellite launch. Satellite launch is same as long-range ballistic missile launch. And satellite launch caused I think, was it 2012, John, 2013, the lead day deal to fail, we had the last significant deal U.S. had with North Korea was called lead day deal. It must be 2012, right? It's lead day, and that failed because after the deal was signed, and they promised that there would be no missile launches, there was a satellite launch. And about 2 months later, month and a half later, and we said you had promised no missile launch. And they said, no, this is not a missile launch, it's a satellite launch. And so the deal got canned in 2012. So it'll be interesting to see a reaction to a satellite launch, because if the past is guide, we would treat it as a missile launch, long-range missile launch. But with in the current administration, I don't know whether we would treat it as a long-range missile launch.
Probably as soon as, for example, Secretary Pompeo says no satellite launch is unacceptable, then there would kind of invitation, right? Send out to North Korea.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's be a little bit optimistic for a second, and talk about the best case scenario. You already mentioned the possible interim deal between the U.S. and North Korea. If both Washington and Pyongyang come closer to a compromise, how far do you think both sides can go? You already mentioned, but you may want to focus a little bit more on the conditions that has to be made to have the kind of best case scenario?
I think the best case scenario, I mean, best realistic case scenario is for North Korea to agree to give Pyongyang, and at the same time they promise a complete freeze on new nuclear material production, and then they would also agree, following that, how we can verify. Those three elements would be best possible deal from the North Korean side. Now, the tricky elements are, of course, verification, and so you would have to come to an agreement and then have a meeting on what we call the verification protocol. You know? And so that was always the issue under which both agreed framework and six-party talks failed at. To get the verification framework to be that we are able to implement. And if we can get that, I think many of the detractors in Washington community would go along if they found the freeze and verification to be realistic. You know? And so that kind of deal, I think many in Washington would say is worth giving some sanctions. Not all of it, some sanctions relief, as well as things like opening liaison offices, doing end of war declaration, and then having a second track of talks, which is that they make similar progress, parallel track or peace track. So you have peace track process, and then you would have denuclearization track process.
So when it comes to the housing market, the keywords are always location, 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 right? So when it comes to nuclear deal between the U.S. and North Korea, it's always verification, verification, verification.
Right.
I think I'm very good at summarizing.
Very good. Yeah.
Yes. Let's talk about U.S. Domestic politics. So, to what extent do you think the U.S. domestic politics will play in terms of the Trump administration's ability to deliver whatever they promised to North Korea?
I don't think U.S. domestic politics play any role, hardly any role, unless things go really wrong. Unless there is really heightened tensions going back to fire and fury, even war, then there will be domestic political content. But supposing things continue as it is, it's not going to go. Just like it did in 2016, even though U.S. relations with North Korea was very bad. I doubt one congressional district in the whole country would be determined by North Korean issue. I think what is at stake more is Donald Trump's own pride. I think he does think that this North Korea making a deal there may get him a Nobel Peace Prize. I think he's quite serious about that. So I think it makes a difference for his pride and for his foreign policy credentials to say he's done something, but in terms of actual electoral votes, I don't think any impact on it.
So probably psychology.
Unless something goes very wrong, as I say.
Psychologists rather than political scientists would be in a better position to analyze the situation. Let's turn to the other regional players, China. So what do you think China's geostrategic calculations are now after they watched the results of the working level negotiation?
I think, again, in the latest, this round of diplomatic initiative, you also got to believe China is a big winner. China is a big winner because nothing substantial has changed in North Korea in terms of Chinese alignment with North Korea, yet tensions are down. And it is clear to everyone, China still has the most control, most influence, most leverage over North Korea. It is not an accident. Each time Kim Jong Un sees Donald Trump, he makes sure he sees Xi Jinping first. I mean, it's completely like choreographed. And so each time he goes there, is to get guidance, is to get permission, is to get blessing. So China, I think, has come out, as a big winner in this round.
So I remember people jokingly said, if you really want to know when Trump and Kim is going to meet, you really want to know when Kim and Xi Jinping is going to meet, right?
Yeah, I think that's completely right. Yeah.
My last question. It seems let's talk about South Korea's role. So it seems that as long as Seoul is unable to persuade Washington to ease the sanctions blocking the inter-Korean economic cooperation, Pyongyang seems to be unwilling to re-engage with Seoul, at least for now. So do you see any room for South Korea to play a meaningful role down the road as it did, like brokering the summit meeting between Trump and Kim and jump-starting the stalled negotiations?
Yeah, I don't think, as I said, the summit engagement between Trump and Kim Jong Un would have been possible without South Korea. I think South Korea was most clearly mediator in arranging both the Singapore meeting and Hanoi meeting. I think maybe, there is a little bit of resentment within Washington that maybe South Korea micromanaged it too much, so there is a little bit of resentment. And I don't think anything can happen between Kim Jong Un and Donald Trump without intervention from South Korea. So South Korea has an enormous role to play. It is the only country who can really speak to both Pyongyang and Washington and have a high degree of credibility.
And you expect Seoul should play the same?
I expect Seoul has to play if there is going to be, if this momentum is going to stay.
Okay, with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor and take questions. Please identify yourself and ask questions, not make a speech. Yes, sir.
I'm Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I am concerned that the Yang thing isn't going anywhere because there's another Yang underground. And without that one, and probably the second one, and the uranium mining brought to a close, I think this is all magical thinking. The question, are you guys going to release the love letters at some point, or do I have to file my FOIA? And I'm serious. And two, last week we have a new constitution telling us that North Korea is indeed a nuclear state. At some point in the next decade, we're going to realize that this thing ain't working. What's plan B?
Thank you very much. By the way, I'm out of government. I have nothing to do with love letters. Okay, yeah. So, on your question, I think you have to be very naive to believe that North Korea will be denuclearized anytime soon. My difference with someone like John Bolton is that John Bolton believes that, like me, we believe North Korea is not going to be denuclearized. John Bolton's answer is that you must force them then, in that case. You must go in and take them out by force. I don't believe that's going to work either without triggering a nuclear war. Okay? And that is a cost too high. Rather, what I think is that then there is no other alternative but a negotiation. It may take decades. We may never get there. But negotiations that build some degree of trust as you implement early steps by step. As you open the liaison office, there's more of communication. As you open the economy, there is more of trade and investment going on. And then maybe, just maybe, things may be different 20, 30 years down the road. No. Meanwhile, tensions are down, you have averted. You're not going to have the kind of environment where nuclear war is likely. So I call that an interim deal. That's just the first step. And that may take several years to do.
There's a plan C, covert action.
Yeah. What covert action?
Give me your email.
I mean, it's a dream, to think there is a covert action and which is going to go so well that you will see, what? You will see what Kim Jong Un assassinated, replaced by what? He has an uncle, So these are not believable scenarios. We're not, watching season 1 of some, North Korean covert action drama. I mean, so if you really, wanted to do something, you're willing to risk a nuclear war, which could kill millions of people, let alone Denver, then, but it's not a realistic risk. And one thing that U.S. has determined, I mean, I've seen this in my 25 years working on North Korea. War is simply not a price U.S. is willing to pay to denuclearize North Korea. So, yeah.
I'm Bill Brown, retired.
Hey, Bill.
I teach a little bit at Oxford Student. But I liked your opening dichotomy between denuclearization and normalization. And I have some questions on the normalization part, not the nuclear part. Basically, whether North Korea, and we talked a little bit about North Korean politics, not much, but all Kim Jong Un. I'm wondering if you think North Korea really internally can normalize. Does it really want to normalize? I'm sure some people, maybe even Kim Jong Un, wants normalization. But if you look at the process, North Korea, as I see it today, is the least normal country in the whole world.
Right.
There's nothing close to it. The way the economy works, the politics works, the judicial system works. It's all, medieval kind of stuff. Now, just today I saw in the Asia press, out of Japan, little announcement. Who knows if it's right or wrong? It's probably hugely exaggerated. But it says the North Korean government is thinking of chopping 1/3 of its workers, state workers, 1/3. I'm sure that's a huge exaggeration. But imagine, and it's the older people they want to kick out. North Korea is the most state-centric economy in the world by far. Probably half the workers work for the state. They're talking about, even if it's 10%, 5%, the rumor is they're going to start laying off lots of state workers. Why would they do this? It's clear to me they have a huge financial problem with this sanction. They're trying to keep their yuan stable. That means they can't print more yuan. I think they're just in really dire financial straits internally in a way that we can't really see. Not there, we don't know. It looks stable, but I think it's non-stable.
Bill, so let me invite you to the dinner to have
Okay.
a long discussion with
Okay.
Ambassador Yu. So,
So
do you have
my
your
question
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
can North Korea really, does it really want to normalize itself? Seems like that's critical to your
Yeah.
dichotomy.
Well, by normalization, I don't necessarily mean being best friends with the US, but normalization in the sense that economic sanctions are less binding, political isolation is less binding, that countries no longer criticize them for things like human rights, religious freedom, whatever, freedom of the press, and then having security assurances. Now, Bill, like you, I don't know whether they truly want that, but clearly they are no, their desire to come out of isolation is there. I think you can assume that, and their desire to improve economic law is there. And so, it's an unknowable question. Similar unknowable question is when you ask, have they made a strategic decision to denuclearize? No, they have not made the decision, and they don't know when they will make the decision, if ever. I think the only thing that we can hope for is to have reduced tensions, continued negotiations, and not backtrack so much. Each time there is a new government in South Korea, or each time there is a new administration in Washington. So essentially, that's all we can do. And to try to dictate what they do internally, I think that's an impossible task. We would like to, but it's not going to be effective.
And let's go to the back. Yes, gentleman in the back.
Thank you. This is Jun Bong from Hangul, Korea. President Trump is said to be much more eager to strike a deal with North Korea than his steps or negotiators, like including Mike Pompeo, Stephen Biegun, etc. So, do you think President Trump and his steps are on the same page regarding the negotiation?
Well, having worked in the administration, this is clear. The boss is Trump, and you would go against him at your peril, as a number of people have found out. So there's no question that Trump sets the tone. Now, I think one thing that we often make a mistake is that we assume Trump doesn't know very much about North Korea. I think that's a mistake. From very early on, what I witnessed was that he was very eager for information on North Korea, for options on North Korea, and he was very eager to engage North Korea. And certainly that was my experience. And so to assume that he speaks from no knowledge on issues like denuclearization, the internal dynamics in North Korea-China dynamic, I think it's a mistake.
It's the gentleman in the back.
John Burton with the Korea Times. You mentioned humanitarian assistance, but there are a lot of U.S. NGOs that complain about OFAC requirements and the travel restrictions. Do you see any chance of Treasury and State easing those?
Yes, they will ease them once there is some degree. If you were to reach any deal, even a small deal with North Korea, the first thing that will be eased is humanitarian assistance. And especially on things like food assistance, medical assistance, technical assistance for US NGOs, as well as South Koreans. South Korea will take same step, and I believe that should also open for inter-Korean projects like Kaesong Industrial Complex and Kambang Mountain tours. So I think all these things will be eased the moment there is a deal.
What type of deal?
So the deal will be G2G deal on North Korea. As I said, sketched out some interim deal. The deal will be again how much denuclearization for how much normalization. That's always the deal.
Lady in the front. Let me get back to this side after this lady.
Hi, I'm Soyeon Kim from RFA. So the latest working level talk in Sweden, it took almost like 8 months after.
8 hours.
Oh, no, I mean, after Hanoi summit,
Okay,
even
yeah.
to set up date and place. So that means which side were pretty, careful to have this kind of, to resume the talk. So which side do you think Trump and Kim Jong Un more desperate to resume another talk or back on track towards denuclearization talk?
Well, that's an interesting question. Because on the one hand, I do really believe that North Koreans came to Stockholm ready to walk out. I think for both North Koreans and for the US, it was important to say they did what the leaders agreed to do in DMZ. Because in DMZ meeting, the leaders agreed that they would be working level meeting. So that's ticking a box, Yeah, my president said we'll have a meeting, so we had a meeting, I think in terms of substance, the problem was neither side came in with very different position. On the North Korean side, I think they, as I said, they miscalculated. They really thought they could get something out of American side. And while American side, nothing substantial has changed, from Hanoi, which is Yongbyon Bai in itself is not good enough to do anything on the US part. So who is more desperate? I would say for Trump, muddling along as it is fine strategy. He can last until the election next November 2020. But the question is, will Kim Jong Un allow him to do that? Will Kim Jong Un, give him a pass to say, let's continue as it is until next November? I find that a little doubtful. They've made a huge threat already that things better change by the end of the year, this year. And so I do expect by the end of this year, early next year, things will, it may be that North Korea does a satellite test or something to, what we call an action forcing event. That they will have an action forcing event which will change that dynamic. So either they go into further negotiation, which I think is most likely, rather than the other way, go back to fire and fury,
Gentlemen, and then lady.
My name's Phoenix Ho from China. I'm a grad student in Elliott School. So I just want to ask something about the unification of the Korean Peninsula. How does it fit into the picture of North Korean politics? I guess this is a two-dimensional question. How is it part of the ideological composition of Kim Jong Un, and how does it manifest itself in the real world, and how will it be manifested?
I think the real unification or reunification is an ideological component of everyone in Korea, Just the question is how much do they want it, how much are they willing to pay for it, how realistic it is. A lot of South Korean conservatives tend to think that having nuclear weapons in North Korea means that South Korea has to live, under North Korean influence, superiority, whatever you want to call it, and eventually under North Korean, unification terms. I find that very hard to believe. The most leftist of South Koreans will not want to live under Kim Jong Un. There's no question in my mind. And South Korea has per capita income of $30,000. North Korea has per capita income of $1,000. And so it is much wealthier. It is a dynamic democracy, South Korea. Tremendous press freedom, maybe too much, tremendous civil society, NGO. There is no way North Korea can overcome all that to be the drivers of unification. North Korea has nuclear weapons because it could not compete with South Korea on conventional weapons. It just could not. And which is why North Korea has them. Now, So I think now South Korea is much more about reconciliation, having two countries live in, not as an enemy state, but kind of at peace with each other. And I think that's the most South Korean aim. Even conservatives would admit that, there is no way to unify, but rather let's just, reconcile. I mean, that reconciliation spirit is typically stronger among progressive than that for conservatives. And I think, North Koreans also, I mean, we all think it is North Korean dream to live like South Korea. I doubt that, I seriously doubt that. I mean, I think, for North Korea, unification certainly means there will be second-class citizens in South Korea. And I really doubt that's what they want.
Hi, I'm Maya. I'm a freshman at the Elliott School. Earlier you were talking about how Kim Jong Un was unwilling to talk to the Obama administration due to what he had said in an interview. If Kim Jong Un does indeed wait until the next election process and we do end up having a new president, do you think that this might occur again, where the US administration will no longer communicate with North Korea because of the new individual in power?
I think it's not going to happen again. My view is that next year, if it's not Trump, it's going to be a Democrat. And I think generally, I cannot imagine a Democrat administration, ending negotiations. So I think the diplomatic initiatives will stay. And there may be initially some effort to review the issues, to renew the issues. But again, you always come to the same conclusion in any administration I've been to. I've worked there, which is in the end, there is no other solution but negotiation.
Let's take one more question from this side.
Hello, I think I heard you say that domestic opinion in the US really has very little to do with resolving this crisis. Of course, Trump would like us to believe that that's true about all the crises he creates. But my question is about the US Institute for Peace. I didn't hear if you talked about its mission, but I'm wondering if there is a role for educating the American public about any of these issues, particularly around ending the war, the Korean War from 1953, that the American public needs to hear so that our government becomes more democratic.
I'm delighted to work at U.S. Institute of Peace. And we have a number of projects going, including in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Africa, where a lot of them have to be internal civil war that we're trying to build confidence in, building measures and so on. On North Korea in particular, we started a project on engaging North Korea on what we call Track 2 dialogue, which is, even though a lot of their Track 2 had to be government. So I'm trying to start a dialogue with them using the kind of people I knew when I was in the government, the North Koreans that is, to discuss humanitarian issues. Because I do believe that what they need more than anything is help on food assistance, food technology, farming technique. My home state is Oregon, and so we have a number of NGOs there who are interested in engaging. So I'm trying to open that. But one thing I found a real difficulty with North Korean is everything for them is government. So when government walks out of meeting in like Stockholm, they don't really want any other meeting to take place that could promote humanitarian dialogue. It's very frustrating working with North Korea.
Okay, let's move back to this side. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm Yong Seok-ju from the Korea Economic Daily, and I have two questions. And first is, Mr. Trump has complained about the high cost of U.S.-Korea joint military action. And so if North Korea demands the stop of the nuclear U.S.-Korea joint military action, do you think that Trump will accept it? And the second question is, if North Korea launches nuclear ICBM or starts nuclear weapons again, test again, what will happen? And what could be the Trump's response? Thank you.
I think Trump will be very, very annoyed with the ICBM launch by North Korea, because it would mean that that North Korea has gone back on their word, and more than that, Trump has said many, many times that that it was important that they continue to suspend ICBM launches. So I think his reaction would be very angry, and you can predict his angry reaction just as well as I can. So, and on the joint exercise, I think it was a joint exercise, large joint exercise, remain suspended. Now, what North Korea has objected to is small joint exercises even. I think the last one they seriously objected to was in August, when some kind of Air Force, exercise, Max Thunder, I think it was called, exercise. But if you are to freeze all exercise, that gets into difficulties, questioning readiness of the troops who are on the Korean Peninsula. So I don't think it's realistic to completely freeze every exercise. I think in order to get there, you would have to have more confidence-building measures.
Yeah, one more question. Or was there another question?
No, I answered both.
Yeah, sorry. Let me take one more question from here. Yes. Gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Ethan. I'm a first year student at the Elliott School as well. So when you were talking about the possibility of an interim deal, I was casting my mind back to the last nuclear deal we had with Iran and the JCPOA. And I was thinking about the differences between that process and this process. And one of the major ones I thought of was that this seems to be very much one-on-one with a little bit of help from South Korea, but that's mostly between the US and Korea without any other allies. So I have kind of a two-pronged question for you. First of all, what do you think the role of our allies is in the future of a North Korea deal? And do you think that another deal as comprehensive as the JCPOA is possible with North Korea?
Yeah, I think the role of allies very, very important, and which is why I really support broadening the dialogue and engagement to include countries like South Korea and China. I think their views, if you're a negotiator, when you are completely isolated, 1 against 3, 1 against 5, then you have a reason to come back to capital and reassess the situation. So that kind of, what I call both pressure and burden sharing is very much necessary. JCPOA was literally, if you include annex, it was over 1,000 pages. I don't think such deals are possible in any time near future with North Korea. I mean, the most significant agreement with North Korea was a green framework. I think that was page and a half. So you're not going to get minute details into agreement until you get to a much later stage. And I think the one key difference, obviously, with Iran and North Korea is that North Korea has nuclear weapons. Iran doesn't. That's a key difference.
One more question from here.
This is the ambassador's.
Yeah,
She has a question.
afterwards, yeah.
So after this gentleman,
Good afternoon. My name is
can you raise your mic?
Good afternoon. My name is Jong Un, PhD candidate at American University. My question is, to what extent do you believe cultural and sports diplomacy, like inter-Korean teams, can make substantial contributions to diplomatic engagement, or do you find them more good optics but not very substantial?
I think that can be very, very helpful. The last Winter Olympics showed that, the Pyeongchang Olympics, and I think without that, venue, without holding Olympics, I think, we've been a lot more difficult to have the diplomacy that South Korea conducted with North Korea, fielding joint teams in some event, and I think all that contributed towards the initiative that built up, including the first summit between Kim Jong Un and Moon Jae-in. Now, I think it is a shame that it cannot be used more widely. I understand that there is a World Cup qualifying soccer match about to happen tomorrow, I think, in which North Koreans would not agree to televise it, So again, you look at how North Korea treats these things, and it's hard to like them or understand them, but there it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Barbara Harvey, retired Foreign Service Officer. I served in Seoul in the early 60s and was North Korean desk officer in the 80s. I wanted to ask about the role of China. You mentioned they play a very important role with North Korea, but now that they have good, at least economic relations with South Korea, does that change the dynamic, and does it change China's view toward possible eventual unification of the peninsula?
I think China has valued stability of North Korea, that stable North Korea under their auspices, not under US auspices, as the highest goal. That trumps, I think, all economic goals, even nuclear goals. I mean, China does not want nuclear North Korea, but it would rather have nuclear North Korea than unstable North Korea, or North Korea that is likely to be in the US orbit. So it has emphasized that above all. Now, China, they tell us they would not mind unified North Korea as long as unified North Korea was not in an alliance relationship with the United States.
Unified Korea.
Unified Korea, yeah. And so they're very clear that, again, it's the US presence that is vital, that is of their interest, and that US presence beyond South Korea should not go further north. I think ultimately, the economic interest is important, but I think it's secondary to their strategic interests, and we saw how they reacted when South Koreans and US put up the missile defense system. They reacted very badly, even at the cost of their own economy, obviously, as well as South Korean economy.
Lady in the front, she's my boss, so I cannot resist.
Thank you. I have a question about the meaning of alliance. So it looks like the meaning of alliance had been somewhat shifting under Trump's administration, and I guess somewhat in a negative way. and recently, Trump's been demanding more and more for defense costs, and there's been some concerns that if it keeps on increasing, at some point, U.S. will withdraw its troops, and the current situation, it looks like, is that South Korea's relation with Japan is deteriorating, and some scholars even mention that current situation is somewhat similar to turn of the 20th century, which I would not even want to think about because we all know what happened. And so I would like to ask, what is your view on the current security situation in, well, I guess focusing on South Korea, and what do you think South Korea's stance would be?
I think President Trump has been very, very detrimental to U.S. alliance relationships, both in Asia as well as in Europe. And I think alliance relationships have been tremendous benefit to the United States. It has allowed for strategic presence in South Korea and Japan, and also in Asia have some presence in Singapore as well as Australia. That's it saves money ultimately. It's not, it's in fact cheaper having troops in South Korea than in Alabama. This is because South Korea pays all the host nations, kind of utilities, local construction, local hire, while in fact you have to pay the same thing if they were in Alabama. So it's been very detrimental. Now, so what's in U.S. interest is not necessarily the interest of other countries, especially China and Russia. So China and Russia have always questioned alliance network, and their argument is that, security is a collective thing. That you just don't form an alliance with one or two countries, have your own security, which is harmful than the rest. Now, many people in the world believe that, and that's a rational argument too. But that, I believe, does not defeat the central interest that the United States has in maintaining the alliance. Now, generally, in South Korea, for example, it's probably true in Japan, conservatives are largely defined as being pro-US alliance. Progressives are largely defined by being pro-reconciliation with North Korea, and generally mixed feelings about alliance. And so it comes at a time of tensions within Korea itself between left and right. And the kind of a central irony is that the left, who would like to be anti-US, really are kind of hamstrung, shackled a little bit because of the love relationship between Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. So they would like to come out and demonstrate against the U.S., but for Donald Trump and Kim Jong Un. So which is why desperate, they're now mostly demonstrating against Japan. And so that in itself has consequences too. To me, the kind of, at the moment, parting of the ways between Seoul and Tokyo over history issues, and then retaliation by Japan on putting Korea not on the most favored list of exports, and then South Koreans responding by ending the intelligence sharing agreement called GSOMIA. That thing could all have been avoided, I believe, had Donald Trump made a phone call to either Abe or Moon saying, guys, cut it out, But he didn't, because I believe ultimately he doesn't care, And so in the end, that damages U.S. national interests.
Let's take one more question from this side. The lady in the back, please.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm a second-year graduate student here at Elliott. So you said that regarding denuclearization, freeze, inspection, and verification are really crucial for this process. So under its inspection, do you think that when IAEA comes into North Korea to inspect, do you possibly see that North Korea suggesting, for instance, like, oh, the inspectors have to be North Koreans, such as like, do you think that North Korea would suggest those specific conditions?
Yeah, those conditions will be pre-negotiated in what we call a verification protocol, which is that you give IAEA independence and you give them right, and that, again, that's a long kind of point-by-point agreement we have to come to. What site, what kind of access, and what kind of notification do you need? Do you need no notification inspection? So those will all have to be negotiated, and those are some of the toughest negotiations, because me often being from the political side of negotiations, I want to reach an agreement, while say most of these points are very technical points that non-proliferation guys will agree to, and they will be very hard to agree. And so in fact, often we'd have to tell experts what to do, and then they complain, and then we get in trouble. This is internal U.S. working.
Yeah. We have like 13 minutes left, so to save time, I know you have a lot of questions, so let me collect like 2 or 3 questions
Let's do that.
together.
Good idea.
So this gentleman first.
Hi, I'm Hideki with NHK, Japan Broadcasting Corporation. Well, I have a follow-up question on the alliance. I mean, President Trump has decided to withdraw U.S. troops out of Syria. So I'm wondering that when the U.S. negotiated with North Korea, a reduction of U.S. forces in South Korea could be used as a bargaining chip or not.
Any questions from this side? Gentleman there.
I'm Jae-jung Kim from Gyeongyang Shinmun, South Korea. You explained a lot about the interim deal. What I want to know is the interim deal is the goal of the Mr. Trump or this administration? Because I don't think they mentioned publicly about the interim deal. They just told big deal. So I want to know difference, and is it their goal at the moment?
Anybody? Yes.
Hi, my name is Sean Lee from GW Undergraduate. I see nuclear weapons are the key of Kim's legitimacy as a North Korea leader, and not like Hanoi meeting, the symbolic meeting. If the time of real negotiation comes, would Kim risk his legitimacy and negotiate with US for unpredictable economic and diplomatic gains?
That's it? Okay, thank you very much. First question on alliance issues and whether reduction of troops is possible in negotiations. I think that is not possible in the first initial agreement. I think reduction of troops has to be part of peace track and peace treaty. And I think if you are North Koreans who are helped by Chinese, if you say war has ended and we're negotiating a peace treaty, I would imagine one of the things North Koreans will demand is absence of all foreign troops from Korean Peninsula. And I do think that will happen eventually. When there is a peace treaty negotiation, that has to be part of it, but not as part of early negotiations. On the second question on interim deal, why not a big deal? Big deals are difficult. I mean, if given the choice, of course you would choose a big deal. But again, in big deal, you're going to have to discuss issues like Hideki just raised on what to do about foreign troops on Korean Peninsula. And so, which is why most, I think, analysts now argue that it has to be a step-by-step process. And I mean, you could have a big picture roadmap, but I think you wanna, actual implementable agreement would have to be sliced as an ongoing project. And I hope that's the case, because I think if you have a big deal that try to resolve everything, you resolve nothing. And then on last question by Sean on whether Kim Jong Un would risk legitimacy by going into unpredictable venues. I think that's a good question. And Kim Jong Un is what, 34, 35 years old, and it is clear that he people always used to question, is he actually in charge or is he a figurehead? I think now there's no doubt that he's in charge. He's not a figurehead, and that he is the one calling the shots. And it seems he's quite comfortable calling the shots. And so, I don't think he will risk giving up everything, which is their nuclear weapons. That's everything. But I don't think he will give it up. But it does not mean in the short run, and you put many short runs together, it's a long run, that he's not prepared to improve relations with the United States, South Korea, or whoever, to get, essentially more support from his own people, increase welfare. But again, I don't think he's going to give up nuclear weapons just yet.
Let's do one more round, probably the last round. Yes, John.
These are kind of comments, but also they're not one-winded comments.
That's okay, you can be long-winded.
Let's make it short.
You've been doing this long time.
I disagree.
Longer than me.
I disagreed with one thing you said, which you seem to write off Japan entirely. What I'm seeing is a movement in Japan-North Korean relations. We've had some very high-level LDP delegations that have been there. One of them was led by Mr. Kanemaru's grandson. You also had most recently a visit by the Japanese Medical Association. And the head of that is very close to the Prime Minister Abe. And looks like they may be stealing a march on South Korea. South Korea is locked up in indecisiveness because of part of domestic political difficulties, and also because of Big Brother and the need for a commission before they do anything. I don't think Mr. Abe has any such restraints. So that's one thing. The other thing is, you seem to imply that North Korea doesn't want a U.S. military presence on the peninsula. And I think there is another opinion, which is that North Korea likes to balance off big powers around it and may seek some utility in a U.S. military presence, not pointed against it, maybe downsized, but as a counterweight to China. So I wondered if you could comment on those two things.
Tim Shura from The Nation magazine. I've been writing about Korea for a long time. My question has to do with the think tanks here in the U.S. media. When you said that you thought the American public had Kim's reputation kind of, or he's seen as a legitimate leader. He's gone from 14% to, I forgot the percent, okay? That does not seem to be the view of the press here. Does not seem to be the view of the think tanks. we get every week almost, imagery. All they have to do is paint something green on the Yongdong plan. It's like, CSIS put out lengthy studies about how they're building this and that. And the questions major reporters from major networks ask government officials about this in the Trump administration reflect complete cynicism about this process. And basically they despise North Korea and Kim as a leader, and they don't pay any attention whatsoever to South Korea in the least. So how can an incoming next president, they're gonna face all this pressure like, don't give in like Trump did, that kind of thing. Don't you think the press has more of an important role to play than they did? That's the question.
Let me take one more question from this side. This gentleman in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Conrad Lee. I'm from Yonsei University in Korea. Ambassador, do you believe that all the changes in the alliance system, is it a Trump phenomena or a general change in U.S. foreign policy? Because I get the sense that U.S. foreign policy, maybe because of President Trump, has become personalized and institutionalized. And I want your points on this. And another question is, the U.S. always emphasizes CVID or FFVD. Do you think this is possible or negotiable with North Korea?
I mean, I have 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you very much, John. It's always been reported that North Korea would not mind U.S. troop presence. Supposedly, Kim Jong Un said to Kim Dae-jung that. I don't believe it. I think it's they're pulling it there. I think they can accept U.S. Force presence if it's completely of the other color, which is they wear blue helmets, maybe, the UN under UN auspices, and not there are not 30,000 U.S. troops in South Korea, maybe a couple of hundred. If that's what it means, yeah, but I don't think they can accept a war-fighting unit in South Korea. On Japan relations, I think you're right. There are some secret negotiations going on, and I think Japan may pull a surprise, as Koizumi did. But I think it's just so fractured, and I just don't think Japan will be able to do anything until it overcomes its own internal dynamics with abductions. On our Tim's question on press and so on, I agree with you. In general, Washington policy community, it's very scarred with past experiences. And let's face it, this is not a likable country or likable regime. But I think my boss a couple of decades ago was Steve Bosworth. He had my job, 10 years ago, I guess. And he said, we should deal with North Korea not as we wish it were, but as it is, and I think among people who actually negotiate with them, whether it's Steve Bosworth, Chris Hill, and so on, that you have to take that attitude. Otherwise, you're going to get nothing done. But it is, North Korea is an interesting issue. It's an interesting case in study. Kept me employed after government retirement, so it's not all bad. And I think, even Obama, remember, came into government, extending hand to North Korea, Iran, Cuba, Burma, and I actually worked on this Burma thing. And I think he, for whatever reason, and many people have different theories. My theory is that North Korea was determined not to stop their weapons program until they got to the end. And they're fairly close to the end, if not at the end already. And so whatever Obama did, they were not going to respond to it. So in the end, Obama got completely fed up and called this policy strategic patience. You know, in government, when you are lost for words, what to call someone, you use strategic, you know. So strategic patience just sounds like deeper than patience, you know. And that's what happened in that case. I think our Yonsei students' question on, I agree with you. The Trump's attitudes towards alliance, I think also is a trend. He may be an example of an extreme version of that. So in that sense, you know, Trump is not an aberration, but is a symptom of things to come, which is US retreat from global engagement. And so I think when that retreat is done in a way that does not really take care of alliance partners or partners, most recent example being pro-Kurds, you have to get worried. Your credibility is at stake. So you have to get very worried as this trend may be, you know, it is a permanent feature, but you have to work within that to mitigate the likely damages. And on your question on CVID, I mean, nobody uses CVID anymore. I think to say that a CVID is nothing always means it's nothing. Okay, so you have to be willing to go step by step. And I think this is what I find a little bit frustrating where we are. There has to be a lot of secret negotiations, a lot of negotiations going on without public blame. And it seems most everything happens, through press release, through press statement, through tweets or whatever. And I mean, you look at, how we got to a deal with Iran. I mean, there was a ton of work that was done without any publicity. And I think that's what's needed now. Thank you very much.
So I think we're entering kind of an increasingly chaotic domestic and international, political period, considering the news we're reading every day nowadays. And we are really lucky to have Ambassador Yun and listen to his insightful comments at this specific juncture. And please join me in